Hey, it's Michael, and I've got a question for you. How good are you at having a conversation, listening, and being slow to jump in to provide your feedback? Welcome to the follow up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore how we communicate well. What we have been taught about communication and what has been modeled and incentivized through our culture has left us in a place where we know how to exert our ideas and opinions and beliefs onto each other, but we miss the other half of conversation, the extraction. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before. To teach you how to ask curious questions, how to seek understanding over certainty, and how to listen and give space so that ultimately you might become a better communicator. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we reveal what connects us as humans. Our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and what we stand for, rather than what we are against. Back in episode 99 of this show, Manu Meel offered up what is now my favorite definition of empathy when he said that empathy is helping the other person feel like they belong in that space with you. And then later in episode 110, I dove into active listening and how it's misunderstood these days. And with the help of other guests like Fred Dust and Dr. Kurt Gray, Oscar Trimboli, and Tanya Israel, we explored what it means to actually listen well. And that is not to actively listen where you're setting up a series of performances and a series of tactics to try and make it seem like you're listening to the person, but to give them the space to ask them questions, to get the fullness of their experience and their perspective and their ideas out of their head so that you move from what they say to what they think to what they feel. And the only way to do that, as I mentioned in episode 110, which is probably one of my favorite episodes of this show, so I encourage you to go back and listen to it. The only way to do that is to ask more questions, to ask follow-up questions, which is the entirety of the reason that this show exists. Well, my guest here on this episode has taken both of those concepts of empathy, of holding space for someone and helping them feel like they belong in that space with you, and asking questions to uncover the fullness of someone's personhood and who they are. My guest today is Orly Israel, and he does that in one of the best ways that I've ever seen. Orly hosts listening tables, which he started setting up in early 2022. And a listening table is just as it sounds. He sits down at a table. He says, I'm not going to give you advice. I'm not going to judge you. I'm just going to listen to you. And you will not believe the conversations that complete strangers have with Orly simply because he's willing to hold space and ask them questions and listen. We get into what this has meant for Orly and what he's trying to do, the example that he's trying to set with this initiative and trying to get other people to host their own listening tables. But also something really remarkable happens here. And it's something that I've felt here on the show as well as the host here of this podcast. For those of us who are so intent on listening to others, it really, really feels good when someone turns the tables and listens to us. And I got the opportunity to do that for Orly. And we go to some places that I don't believe either one of us could have imagined the conversation would go to when we hit record on this conversation. Let's just get this out of the way, I guess. We're recording this in March 2024. How many listening tables have you done?
I've actually lost count, and I need to find out by doing the math how many I've done, because I've done at least one a week since November 2021, which I think is somewhere between 170 and 200 now,
That's wild.
but I have no idea. I'd like to know. I feel a small sense of pride that I've lost count, but I also keep an active journal about the experiences that I have. And so it really is just me counting like pages to see, okay, I lost count around 140. So how many have I done since then?
At what point, I guess, let me back up and ask the question this way. Do the conversations begin to run together, or do some conversations stick with you longer? Do they resonate with you more? Just what are those conversations like with you?
Some of them definitely run together at this point, and some of them stick with me. I think that for the first probably year and a half, I could remember, and I do keep a journal. So if I open the thing, oh, I remember this, you know. Um, but there have been conversations where, because I set up in regular places sometimes, where I'm in Los Angeles and there's a couple of spots that I frequent, and someone will come up and say, "Hey, I remember me from the last time." I'm like, "Oh my god, I maybe." I think I've remembered everybody, but not until they've reminded me kind of what we talked about. Like, oh yeah, Pete, I remember we talked about this. Uh,
Yeah.
so I am losing some of the details, but there are still ones that really stand out.
I want to come back to that, but something I heard you say as I was listening to some of your other podcast appearances is you said, um, the listening tables you have found that they're good for big cities, but not so much for small communities. Can you recall why you said that?
The reason I think I would have said that is because cities have people walking around. And I have done a handful of listening tables in smaller places. But if it's not a place that people walk around at, or that where people will be, I think it is a challenge to set up something in public and have enough people walk by that someone will actually stop by. I think that the theory behind listening tables will work anywhere that people are. It's just doing it in public in, the Netherlands, where somebody does a listening table, uh, is if it's raining out or cold all the time, or people are going from one place to another, very different than sitting up by the beach where people go to take walks and, oh, I have time to spare, might as well sit down and talk. Location is important when you're setting up something in public, for sure.
So it's a physical space thing, not a personality of the type of person that lives in a small community.
So far, yeah.
Did I hear that
I
right?
haven't
Yeah.
tested it. I'm exploring the concept of driving up to Humboldt for a little while, which is a small town. A friend of mine has invited me to stay in the town that he has a house, which has a population of 300.
Yeah.
And I'm like, would this work in a population of 300 where people move to get away from people? I don't know, but I'm willing to find out.
You find the best cafe there, and I guarantee you'll get people to talk, right?
I think so. I've done a couple cafes.
So I want to go back to what you said. The conversations that stick with you. I don't want to ask what conversations have stuck with you, Orly, but I want to ask, what do you do with those conversations? Because I've got to believe people are unloading some heavy stuff on you when they finally get the opportunity to have somebody just listen to them. What do you do with that?
The short answer is I learn from the conversations. I get to have these deep conversations with people, and you're so right. Very few of the conversations are, I'm having a fantastic day. Oh, everything is fantastic in my life. It's wonderful. The sun is out, it's shining. What's there to be upset about? Instead, most conversations are, I'm having a hard time in a relationship. I'm struggling to make a big decision in my life. There's pressure from somebody who I wouldn't want there to be pressure from. Uh, anxiety, mystery kind of situations. The beginning of the tables for me started from, I think, a pretty healthy place where I was going there to practice listening skills and communication skills. And so I never really saw myself as someone who was attached to the result of the conversation. So I didn't need to fix something. And because I never went into it with a need to say, oh, if this person's relationship isn't in a better place after, then I've failed. And so I always felt connected to the person, but disconnected from the person's heavy issue.
Hmm.
And when they left, I was able to process, how could I be there for them better rather than how sad I am that they're in the situation they are in. And then after doing the listening table for a few months, I got invited to volunteer for the suicide hotline, which was super interesting to me. And I did it for a year and took a couple hundred calls. And once I started getting into the rhythm of having really serious conversations back to back, you just develop, I guess, the mentality that once they leave, they are not part of your world anymore. Uh, I Every time I say it, it sounds like kind of cold to me. Um, but I think that it is just the reality of the situation. They're in your life, and then they're not, and I don't let that. I let it go.
Hmm. What do you think it is about the listening tables and the space that you set up, and even your experience in the suicide hotline, that invites people in to bring that heaviness to you? And I ask that question because I'm like, what's missing for people, I guess, is really what I'm asking, Orly. What do you feel is missing for people that they would open up to a complete stranger on a boardwalk in the ocean or in front of the ocean, uh, about some really heavy stuff? What's missing?
I think the simplest answer is they're missing someone to talk to. The people who sit down usually talk about how they don't have someone to talk to about this, or who the people they have in their life. Because I do ask sometimes when they're asking for advice or situations, or there is a lot of times where people just say, I don't have someone to talk to about this, um, in some manner or the other. And maybe they have a person, but not a receptive person, not a good listener. Uh, or some people that maybe they are good listeners, but only for 10 minutes at a time, and the issue is more than a 10-minute issue. So I think people are missing those who have listening skills, those who have, not short term solution compassion. And I think another one of the things that I take some pride in this kind of mashup of marketing and advertising and product selling, and maybe I'm still trying to figure out how to make this, but I never try and tell people, come sit down, hey, come, come sit down, talk about something. If you come to the table, it is purely because you felt like it, and that is inherently giving people the control of the situation. They came to talk because they wanted to. I didn't have any part in wrestling a secret out of them. The only thing I do at the beginning is explain what it is to people who ask, what is this? Well, some people don't have someone to talk to. Some people experiencing loneliness. I am personally working on being a better listener. So I figure, why not give people a chance to be heard and also work on my listening skills at the same time? And that's usually as much as you get. And then someone's like, oh my God. And then they talk about who knows what. Or they just walk over and say, I got something to say.
Why was that so important? What you just mentioned there, that it is of people's own volition that they're coming to you, that you have no coercion or involvement in them coming to you and sitting down at your tables. Why was that so important?
For two reasons. For me, I think so much of everything on the internet is trying to capture people, lure them in to win $5 by doing this, or you know, it's a game. You're trying to get someone to play so you can have an episode about it, and then there's suspense if there's a prize or not. And I think that is, although it's inherently fun and internet stuff, it is fundamentally the opposite of what listening really is, because being a good listener, in my opinion, is a constant state of being where a good listener, as I teach people, isn't someone who says, like, tell me what's going on for you and drawing it out. Sometimes a good listener is able to facilitate that, but also being okay if the person doesn't want to talk about it right now, and letting them know constantly, hey, I'm here for you if you need me, when you need me. And it's not like, if you don't want to talk about it right now, the door closes. So to me, it's the practice of saying, the door's open. If you want to stop by, here I am. But I don't lose if you don't spill your heart out, because I'm doing the being a listener, which means whatever comes out is what I'll receive. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I think it does. You've also described listening as participating in the conversation but not trying to drive it. And I think that's an evolution of what you have just mentioned here.
Yeah.
Do you remember saying that?
I say that every week during my how to do a listening table training class, because people do listening tables all over the world, and I'm always giving people a chance to see how I started it, because I didn't start from zero. I started from having done workshops and taken classes, and learned a lot about communication skills. And one day, one of the teachers said, learning communication skills is like learning how to swim, where you can read as many books on swimming as you want, but you're not going to learn how to swim if you don't get in the water. And so the listening table became the water for me. Uh, but I think that I went into it knowing some of the fundamentals of the skills I was trying to build. So I knew what I was trying to learn. And because of that, I was able to reflect after sessions or during sessions. Oh, I did the thing I was trying to do, or I maybe made mistakes, and being aware of what those were. So I always, it's towards the end of the how to do a listening table conversation, which always says, you do participate in the conversation, but you're not steering the boat.
What do you think we don't understand about listening?
Oh, man, that's good. I think we don't understand how powerful listening is. How you can we don't understand how we already know 99% of the things we're going to say. And the only 1% is if we're freestyle rapping or doing some kind of perfect flow state vocal activity, like an improv thing. Uh, but most of what we're saying, we already know. And most of the stuff on this podcast, you get to hear things maybe you've thought of, maybe you haven't, because you're a listening, thinking guy. But by listening, you open yourself up to infinite possibilities, where when you're speaking, it's mostly just things that you've thought of and reframed in different ways. And so I think that listening is access to the infinity of other people's universes, where in today's media landscape or culture, at least in America, it's always be heard, deliver a message, sell a product, be the pinnacle of like communicate a message, be clear, right? Start with why, never split the difference, right? Take these negotiating skills to use your vocal powers to get what you want, which makes a lot of sense. And there's nothing wrong with when you're using your vocal powers to get what you want. But at the same time, being willing to surrender wanting anything for human connection or understanding of a person in many ways is a such a valuable reward, but on a longer scale. And this doesn't mean like don't try and sell things if your job is sales, right? But it means maybe your sibling doesn't want you to tell them what to do when they come to you for support. These are the lifelong relationships where you want to have a position in people's lives where they can feel like you're a lifelong pal, because you don't need an immediate fix to something. Oh, it's so sad that you're going through something really challenging. I'm here to support you. And sometimes support does mean trying to fix things, but it also sometimes means some things can't be fixed and some things have to be fixed by the person. And sometimes just being able to say, I want to be here for you, human to human, rather than I'm uncomfortable that you're uncomfortable. So if I can try and fix your situation, it'll make me feel better. That long answer basically says, I think that listening is super underrated right now in a world where if you're not putting out 7 pieces of content a week, you are you're bad. As a content creator, you're the worst. And if you are subscribed to any number of creative blogs or lifestyles, like it's create more than you consume. But there's a beauty to consuming human connection that isn't like iterated by an algorithm, but instead conversation.
So much of what you said in there, Orly, is just like I wrote down so much of it. I've got to ask the question based on how you ended that, and then I want to jump back to some other things you said. How do you guard yourself against that creating content mode? Because you do put content out on social media. That's how I found you. How do you guard yourself against being that content creator and being in that mode? And as you've said, you got into this to practice the skill of listening. How do you guard yourself against that?
Great question. I definitely battle with that. I am not on a short timeline with this goal of trying to make the world a better listening place to elevate people's communication skills. And so, because of that, I'm not rushing to make content. I am enjoying the process as much as I can, and trying things I think would be cool. I did 60 plus listening tables before I made a video about it.
Yeah.
I did it for a full calendar year, saying I am not going to be, and this is my own personal, like I am discerning and somewhat judgmental as a person when I'm not at the listening table, and even when I'm struggling with that at the listening table, if someone says something that really challenges my beliefs. But I really didn't want to be a man on the street interviewing people and putting their secrets on the internet for content guy, which is very similar to what I'm doing. But I really didn't want to do that because I wanted to say, look, maybe people tell me their secrets, but it's not about what they're saying. It's about how I'm receiving it, because I want the viewer to identify with me and say, well, this person told me this. And what I wanted to say was this. But since I practiced my listening skills, I ended up saying that. And that opened up the door to a different conversation that I never thought I would have if my pattern always says this, right? And so, yeah, I wrestle with algorithms sometimes, but I also I'm passionate enough about what my message is that I'm not like, I got a great viewed video about a couple saying something incendiary. Some guy, it was a judgmental thing, and someone said something that people really disagreed with, and it got a bunch of views. And I just felt I don't want to get views like that. It doesn't, okay, I put something up, it worked well because people said something really exciting. But I'm not trying to start drama by getting people fired up in the comment section. I'm trying to show that listening is a practice. And as a storyteller, as a person, telling stories is like my favorite thing to do. marketing is storytelling, writing. I worked in kids television for the last 6 years. I just think stories are such an incredible vehicle to sharing wisdom, inspiring people, giving people hope and optimism, teaching lessons. And I think that can exist at the same time as practicing your listening skills. There's times where I'm listening, which is at the table or in my life, and then there's times where I'm spreading a message. And is it 50-50? Is communication skills half listening and half speaking? Not at all. Like this, I'm going to speak for a ton of time, and you, as a good podcast host, are probably trying to get me to say the most things. And so there is a time for speaking and a time for listening. And I think the more you listen, not only to the world, but mostly to yourself, you're able to speak from your heart. How can I listen to myself to say the things that are true to me instead of just hearing, who knows, regurgitating information that is just endlessly coming in, which is also something that's very easy to do, to confuse who you are from the latest podcast episode you listen to.
Well, I got to tell you, if we both entered this conversation with a goal of listening, it would be incredibly boring, and I don't think I would publish it. So thank you for talking enough.
It's a pleasure.
That point that you just made, Orly, I've never heard you in all of my research talk about listening to yourself. And I even wrote down earlier, listening, something you said, listening is access to the infinity of other people's universe. Crazy good quote, by the way. I don't know if you've said that before, but I want to dive into the infinity pool with you here for a second. I've heard you also talk about, and you kind of glanced over it here, that it was that communication professor who told you that listening or communication is like trying to swim. You've got to do it to be able to do it. And you can't learn about it in a book. I've never heard you answer the question, why did that stick with you? Why did that resonate with you? Why was that something that caused you to act when he said that?
For as long as I can remember, I've cared about communication skills. And I grew up in a really great family with 2 younger brothers and 2 parents that were very loving and gave me all of the opportunity and compassion and role models I could possibly ask for, and friends in my siblings who I'm very close with. And even though we came to a really good place, we came from a place where there was a lot of 3 boys living in a house being children. It doesn't really work out when you don't know what you're doing. And I was fortunate enough to have a dad who is a writer. And basically, the long story short of being a writer is you make choices and you make a world. And you think really hard about what everyone in your characters is going to say so that you can have, I guess, a world that makes sense. But you also do like deep psychological kind of spider webs. He says this because he wants this, and he wants this because he thinks this, and he actually needs this, but he doesn't realize it. It's the whole story structure of making complex and interesting characters. And I started thinking of myself like a complex and interesting character at some point, where why am I saying what I'm saying? Yada yada, kind of. Why do I fight with my brothers? Like, what kind of character am I? And I realized I'm not a character that wants to fight with my siblings. So why don't I just choose behaviors that would be more suited for the kind of character I want to be? Someone who gets along with people, someone who has a great time. I don't think that was like creating a fictional character. It's just like, what behavior would I have if I wanted to be friends with my siblings? And that led me to be discerning about the choices I had. And then I got to do volunteering. Well, before that, I just decided, I want to write a book on how people communicate. And I decided I would write the book when I was 65 years old, because that would be the time where I'd learned something. If I spent a whole lifetime researching and learning stuff, and I'd eventually figure it out, and somebody gave me the advice They said, if you wait till you're ready, you're never going to do it. And that was the second, that was like the second thing. The first thing was learning about when I did volunteering in prisons, how if you don't have options, if you don't know, if you've never seen kindness, you're not going to know how to do kindness. If you've never been forgiven, you're not going to know, we're mirrors of who we were raised by. And so, even though I'm glossing over this, it is a key detail. So I figured out we're mirrors, and that inspired me even further. Oh my God, I got to see how people's lives transformed through communication skills trainings. Then someone said, write the book now. You're never going to be ready for it, right? Essentially. Uh, and then so I was primed and I was ready to do something that I wasn't sure how I was going to do, which is write this book. I'm still trying to figure out. The good news is there's a bunch of people who have written this book already. So I got to find out. Oh my God, Marshall Rosenberg wrote Nonviolent Communication. It's the book. It's everything I could write and more. And then the final piece of the puzzle was just hearing, in I guess in a similar way, you're never gonna do it unless you're ready. You got to jump in the water if you're gonna learn how to swim. And so, the teacher said that on a Wednesday. The class was on a Wednesday. The first listening table was that Friday because I was just like, if I'm never gonna be ready, I got to learn how to swim. So I have something to write about when I eventually figure out what to learn. And then I just started learning. Oh my gosh, I didn't know what would happen. And I've been through so many conversations that I would never have with people in my specific, cultural, socioeconomic location situation where it's just like I get to interact with these worlds where I would never, just several weeks ago, someone was asking me if they should get an abortion, a one-on-one, very personal conversation. People are asking me what they should do about financial situations occasionally. Someone inherited $1 million or more. I didn't ask because it didn't really matter to me. But she's like, I inherited a ton of money, at least $1 million from her parents who passed away. And she couldn't tell anyone about it because she told one of her best friends, and the best friend's like, wow, I wish I had $1 million. And she's like, you're missing the point. My parents just died. And it totally like really hurt their friendship. And just getting to participate in these conversations, and the list goes very long about types of conversations I've been a part of. The amount of, I'm just going to say, consciousness that I can bring now to personal conversations. I just had an incredibly challenging conversation with a very close friend of mine on Saturday uh, about some really, really serious emotional stuff. And I think the conversation could have gone, in a sense, it could have been a really painful conversation. It could have been really hurtful. It just would have been brutal. I guess being vague doesn't really help us here. But me and my girlfriend broke up, and it could not have been a more beautiful conversation. It like I think we're both really happy about it, and I couldn't be happier for her, for myself, and for the beauty of like you don't expect a breakup to be the most beautiful conversation you've had in so long, but because I had this fantastic training to be calm in certain situations and to be receptive to who knows what you're going to hear and empathetic. I mean, it really is like it was phenomenal. I know I kind of went on a tangent there, so I want to bring it back to the question was like, why did I have to learn how to swim there? And it's because maybe if I bring it back to an ocean analogy, because I've spent so much time in the ocean in my life, you usually want to know where rip currents are before you get in the water, right? You figure out, oh my God, I'm stuck in a rip current, bad news. But if you can learn how to spot them, if you can learn the hazards of the beach, you can have so much fun in the ocean because you know how to practice ocean safety. I do like that parallel. as a listener, how do you taking in this like huge tangent I just went on? I know you probably want to bring it back somewhere.
I I was gonna let you go for as long as you needed to and felt to go there. What's the image that I have in my mind, Orly, and the question I want to ask on, well, I've got two that I want to ask, and I'll just say them and then we'll get to them. I want to ask to get to the point where you have that conversation during a breakup, which I can't imagine too many people have described those types of conversations as the most beautiful that they've ever had. I want to understand how you train yourself to listen to yourself, because you are the only variable in that conversation. There's not someone sitting across from you. There's not another person bouncing ideas off of you. It is you. But yet you have said several times now that the listening to yourself is where it begins. You talked about growing up loving communication, and you talked about the flip that teacher, or the switch that teacher flipped when they said you have to be able to go into the water to learn how to swim. Those are all conversations that you have with yourself to act. You talked about wanting to be a better brother to your own, and writing a different character story for yourself. That's the main question I want to ask, is how do you invite in that conversation with yourself? The other, and I want you to answer that question, because the other one I had is just like, how does a kid decide that communication is the thing that they want to that they want to like pursue? I want to know what the kid conversation is like there. But yeah, listening to yourself, that's a huge piece of communication that we're not taught. So how did you develop that talent and that skill?
I think it came mostly. I don't even think it came. I know it came mostly from being dissatisfied with whatever the current state of conversation was. I am a person that in so much of my world speaks unintelligibly. I just say like the silliest things. Most of my text messages are complete gibberish to my friends. They'll joke around that there is a specific, you have to learn how to speak orally, you know, because I have so much fun trying different things. I don't ask how are you. I'll ask the most ridiculous questions. I'll ask how are you sometimes, and I have the ability to be a crazy person and also to be a normal person. And most of my people in my life are like, why do you just choose to be a crazy person all the time? And I'm not doing that on this podcast so people understand the things I'm saying. But generally, I love to have a great time. And I think that being silly and having fun is just it's a good time. Being silly and having fun means you're having a good time. It's like whatever the thing is where you say like what it is, I don't know, it's something an ism, but like having fun is fun, right? Arguments are not fun. And you just see in the world, like this should be more fun. The best parts of life are laughing with people. Why can't we do that more? Fighting sucks, but figuring out creative ways to make people happy with different values can be incredibly fun. Well, you want this and I want this. How can we get this together? How can we get this together and also have a fun time getting there? And so I really was born out of a thought that our highest expressions are when we're comfortable with people and we're able to laugh and have great time. And then at the same time, that's so little of the time that we have. Oh, everything's so serious. Why is it got to be so serious, right? I'm like the joker of my family or my friend group is like, I'm coming in. I never know what's going to happen. But I love that spontaneity. And that's what led me to think like why can't everyone have as much fun as me? Really was what it was. Why are we not having a good time having these conversations? And I figured if I can figure out how communication skills work, then I can figure out a way to communicate to other people how to have a good time. And I think a lot of people could use the thought that you can have a breakup. That's fantastic. That you can have a separation. I remember quitting a job recently. No, I guess not recently anymore, but it was like such a beautiful thing of being like, we just have different wants, um, and different needs, and being able to communicate that, not saying like you're bad and I'm hurting you, but just, those harder conversations of saying, this is what's good for me, and I think that's best for everyone. Uh, and smaller things, we're just asking about people's days and laughing more. And I wanted to see that in the world. Um, and so I was always curious, just like whenever people, there's always drama as children, as high schoolers, as college people, as people in their 20s, which I am going to be in my 20s for 4 more days before I'm no longer in my 20s. Uh, but there's always, drama. And I think it's just more fun when people get along. So I was like, why can't we get along more? Uh, that's how I knew from a young age that I just wanted to get along more with people. Um, the thought of being like such a goofy person, I think, made me feel left out a lot of the time because I didn't fit into any box uh, of people. I wasn't an athlete enough for being on sports teams, even though I was on some sports teams. But I just didn't like compete as much. I was like, competing is inherently not that fun. I love competing now, but when I was a kid, I just, you know, would rather like play around than try and. I didn't understand the concept of why we'd compete. Um, yeah, and just collaboration and being willing to be vulnerable and having good conversations, and there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of it. Now, the second part of your question was, how do I listen to myself in situations like that? The harder conversations, the challenging ones. And the answer is through practice. Being able to sit through so many conversations where you get to hear your internal, you get to discern, what do I want right now? What do I need right now? And in this conversation that I had on Saturday, there was a lot of things I wanted to say, questions maybe I wanted to ask, solutions maybe I wanted to offer, trying to figure out, how do I make this a happier situation? How do I make this a, look, the people are going to have questions, especially at the end of something like that. What went wrong? First of all, I don't think many things went wrong. It really was like a beautiful thing, where it was just what was right wasn't the relationship, for all kinds of reasons that are more personal and private that I should not share,
And please don't.
for the sake of my partner.
Yeah.
Um, but what really just stood out was like the need for, this is the need I'm meeting right now, is to create a really comfortable place where it is okay to be honest, and where empathy is free flowing, and where this is a safe place. And I just listen to, how can I make that the easiest possible thing, where we get to be honest and putting, hearing whatever my ego wants to say and saying, you don't have to say that. So letting it be. And then the answers to like what to say or when to say something really becomes a lot quieter and a lot more, like, I was really happy to hear that she was going to look for something that was different, that was better for her at the time. you know I was like, this is amazing. Like, I'm so happy that you're able to make this choice. It's a scary choice what you're doing. It's just, she communicated that she's very scared, didn't want to be alone. um but she needed to be on part of her journey of life by herself to understand more about herself. And as someone who just wanted to create a compassionate, supportive space, I was like, wow, it takes a lot of bravery to do that. And I really admire you for being willing to go into a scary situation where you're making yourself vulnerable and alone, um, because you know this is what you need. And it was just like I was just so happy that it was the next evolution in where she was at. And at some point she said like I was nervous about this, I don't know how to do it, and I'm like, what's the worst thing I could have said? you know what could I say to make this worse? I really appreciate and respect her.
What attracted you to the listening aspect of communication? You talked about wanting to be the goofy, bring levity to the situation guy, that you have your own language and people got to learn to speak Orly. Um, why did you choose the part of conversation that only you know whether you're doing it or not?
Damn, that's a good question, man. I really appreciate this thought. It's such a good question. The answer is very simple to me. It's the first step, right? Communication is both of them, right? It's listening and speaking. But in all the classes I took and all the things that I'd seen, the workshops I'd done or been part of, listening comes first. Learn how to listen, then learn how to say what the thing is after. And so I figured, there are so many incredibly well studied professors and thought leaders and speaking coaches and gurus, and there's a lot of people who are doing the speaking part of it, and I don't feel any need to compete with those people because they do a really great job. But I did feel like there wasn't enough about the first part. People are offering this full solution to everything, which is kind of self actualization. Become the person that you are on the inside, on the outside. And maybe the person that you are on the inside needs like a boost. And then you stand the door like Superman and, confidence, confidence. Don't be afraid. Do the thing. Um, and I just thought maybe what I could do in a fun way is and this formed during the many hours where I would sit and not have someone at the listening table, right? Because there's a lot of downtime and I'm thinking about things and having moments. I didn't start it thinking this would be a thing. I just I like I said, I did it for a year without posting anything about it. It wasn't for the world. It was just a how can I like it was like going to the gym. I don't go to the gym to be a fitness influencer. I go to the gym so I can be in good shape. And people were really receptive to the concept, and social media liked it too. Um, but I just thought it would be really rad if more people got started on step one, and then I could guide them to say, look, if you liked step one of communication skills and your mind is cracked open to the thought that the things you say and the way you react to things are within your control, which is something that I think is super understated, underknown. It's just not like I think people generally are willing to just be like, "Oh, I don't know why I said that," which is like understandable theoretically, but in practice, unless you have like Tourette's or some condition, like everything you say is fully within your control. And I just thought, well, if I can open the door for people who may not be interested in that, people who I've worked at the suicide hotline. I've done homeless shelters, listening tables, and collaborations. I've uh, been with the in prisons, and there is a population of people who really suffers from long-term effects of not having good communication role models. And I was just thinking, I'd love to be able to get to those people before they're in, working through their several divorces or incarcerated or totally estranged from their family. How can I get to them way before that by just saying, take control of your communication skills? You won't end up estranged, divorced. I mean, maybe you'll be divorced. Statistics on that aren't great, but it is so beneficial to have these skills, these soft communication skills. Yeah, you'll probably get be a better person to work with at a company, uh, better in relationships, better, kinder to yourself, better friend. And then you won't try and take your life because of loneliness, which a lot of people do.
Last couple of questions here, Orly. Wanting to give advice. That's got to be something that you've had to practice as well. Is to stop yourself. Are you pinching yourself under the table? Are you, like, what are you doing to stop yourself and truly just be there as a listener? From what are you doing to stop yourself from not wanting to speak up, give advice? How do you manage that pull?
It gets easier with practice, first of all. But the easiest way for me to realize giving advice isn't necessary is, first of all, most people aren't asking for advice. So if you're listening to them, you realize they're just talking about something. They don't want you to try and solve it. Okay, great. Second, if they talk to you and are asking for advice, being able to hear, because they do. Sometimes they see the sign. They don't care. They want advice. Who am I to give you advice? This is what I say. I say, I just met you 10 minutes ago or less. I don't even know you. I don't know your financial situation. I don't know who else is in your life to support you. I don't know anything about your life that I can give you advice on usually pretty serious things. And so, for the most part, that's all I need is to realize that, say that out loud, and then ask, is there anyone else in your life who you can trust that you can talk to about this? If yes, have you already spoken to them about this? If yes, what have they said about this that has led you to still hearing someone's advice who you trust come to a random stranger and ask for a second opinion? Something must be bad about their advice that you disagree with. And then that has set the stage to say, you've got advice from someone you trust, you don't like it. Why? And then they just end up saying, well, I'd rather do this instead, or I don't feel right about that. And then I don't have to give any advice for someone to be able to explain to themselves, which I think is really rare, a chance to just talk something out without someone trying to fix the situation. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's pretty easy not to give advice when you realize you're just not qualified for most of it.
I think we would all do well to heed that advice, or at least think of ourselves in that way. In the moments where you do give feedback, and I have heard you say that you do from time to time. I've also heard you say that you ask permission almost. Hey, is it okay if I tell you something here? Or is it okay if I give you a little bit of advice, or if I give you my thoughts? Why is that so important?
Absolutely. I love to ask for permission because it opens the door for someone to actually be receptive to what you're sharing. If they're not, then I think they get into a almost combative mindset of, oh, another person's telling me what I should do. I don't really want to hear about this. But if I say, hey, I've just listened to your story, and usually I don't give advice, but I think that there's something I'd like to tell you about that came up for me. Would you be willing to hear it? And I've done this very few times, but there are times, and I remember one of them specifically that really sticks out to me was a kid who must have been somewhere between 10 to 12 years old, maybe 13. And he was talking about how he just came up. I don't know where he was or where he came from, but his parents were getting divorced and he was like trying to fix it. And I just had to tell him, this is the very short summary of what I said is I was like, it's not your fault and it's not your responsibility to fix. And is that my place to say? I don't know. And did I think about, is that my place to say for weeks afterwards? Yeah, totally. But I just felt like, you know what? I have a guideline that says don't give advice, but this kid's really struggling with something. Maybe it won't make a difference. But I think he should know that there is a difference between an adult problem and a kid problem. And this isn't his problem.
Hmm.
Uh, there are times where people come up talking about things that I do know about. Someone talked about social media and stuff, and I could have given him advice, but I didn't really want to, get into that. I was like, this guy seems like he's on a path, and I'll let him do his thing. And one person talked about writing, and I did give him advice, even though he was writing a book that was like so incendiary, just an absolute. I was talking about this book. It was just like the title of the book would already get it banned from half the bookstores in the country, and I was so happy that I was able to say, "Look, I write a lot. Maybe I can give you some thoughts on this if you'd be willing to hear it." Instead of saying, "Oh, dude, this book sounds horrible." So just being aware of my own stake in it, I really don't have one for most of these people.
I appreciate that that thought. Not asking for permission or to give feedback or advice creates a combative mindset. I think that's probably something we all should keep in mind. Orly, last question for you here that I ask of all my guests. What's a question that you wish you were asked more?
I would love for people to ask me if they can give me money for coaching. How can I hire you to help me in life? Would be a really good question for me to hear right now. And you seem like you also are doing this. It says coach in your life. Uh, so I think that you understand probably pretty well that you can only coach people who really want to be coached. And if you don't want to be coached, then
Yeah.
you're probably not going to be receptive to it. Uh, so that's a question I would love for people to ask. How can I hire you to help transform my communication skills and thereby my relationships and strengthen long-term friendships?
Well, usually I ask that question to my guests, but I'm just going to let that hang out there and people can go to the show notes to link up all your websites and contact you and all that stuff. So Orly, man, thank you so much. I appreciate the work that you're doing. I love the perspective of the listening comes first. I'm gonna use that, man. That's inspired stuff, and the infinity of other people's universe will also be part of my lexicon now. So, I appreciate you, Orly. Thanks so much for coming on and doing this.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate you reaching out, and I hope we get to talk another time soon. I'm sure you have so much to offer that we haven't even scratched the surface on. So, thank you for listening, and let's talk again sometime.
Always willing to do it, man. Thank you so much. I want to make note of something Orly said in this interview that is critical to having tough, difficult, uncomfortable conversations, especially when you are trying to hone your listening skills. And that is ask permission to give feedback. If someone is coming to you and simply needs someone to listen to them, to get the thoughts out of their mind, the things that they feel out of their head, ask permission to give feedback. Sometimes we jump in and we believe that simply because we're in conversation with someone, that permission is automatically given to give feedback and that it is automatically wanted simply because we're in the nature of conversation. But it never hurts to ask permission to give feedback because, as Orly said, not doing this creates or can create a combative mindset. Perhaps intentionally, perhaps unintentionally, but that combativeness when you give feedback and it wasn't expected or wanted, that's where we get into this back and forth where everyone is feeling that they're getting their words out and perhaps even that they're heard, but they're not really listened to. Consider that in your conversations moving forward. Make that your takeaway from this episode and interview with Orly Israel. So I want to thank Orly for joining me here on this episode of The Follow-Up Question. Please do me and Orly a huge favor and share this episode with your network. Help us spread the good word about not just asking questions, but about what it means to listen well. Share this with someone you know who might find some value in this conversation or any of the conversations that I get to have here on The Follow-Up Question, the ones that I get to share with you. If you would ever like to get in touch with me, you can always email me. It's michael@thefollowupquestion.com, or you can go to my website, michaelashford.com, and reach out there. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question. And until then, keep asking questions.